Good morning, Composing for Public Audiences MOOCers. My name is Paula Miller. You probably remember me from last week, and this week I'm joined by Chad Iwertz, who is also an instructor here at the MOOC.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here. Should I say a little bit about myself, you think?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a PhD student entering my third year at Ohio State University in the PhD program. I am really excited. This is actually the second time that I have been a part of the MOOC instruction team. So I'm really excited to be here with everyone again. Going through your writing and all your causes, it's really exciting and really invigorating to be able to see all of the really awesome work that's going on. So I'm happy to be here. For my professional interests, I'm specifically interested in intersections of writing, disability studies, and digital media studies. So I've noticed quite a few people are writing about disability and disability studies related topics. So I'm really excited to see that as well too. So yeah, happy to be here.
You know, I don't think I talked much about myself. Oh, here comes my cat. This is what happens. So I am also a PhD student with Chad. We're in the same cohort. And my research deals with writing centers and matters of writing center design and how the ways we design writing centers influences who feels invited to the writing center and what kind of work they feel empowered to do. So there are intersections of identity in my work with writing centers. And what I found really interesting, Chad, this week when I was looking at all the discussion forum posts is, well, number one, I really enjoyed reading people's responses and seeing the ways that students in the MOOC were finding connections between their own work. But I also found it really interesting how many conversations there were going on about identity and academic writing, and this idea that like different genres of writing, I think David Alexander referred to academic writing as kind of artless, and then April Jones mentioned that as a business writer, she sort of feels like she has to put her own voice on the back burner in order to do business writing. And then who's what, Elle Parker, she wrote a lot about, you know, beginning her PhD program and suddenly, as, you know, someone who considered herself a good writer, getting marked up red papers with like a lot of corrections.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like this idea of both identity and like our particular sense of identity being so connected to our language and writing, I think is really interesting. And also this idea that academic writing and like different genres of writing have these different conventions. And it can be sort of difficult to dissect what those conventions are.
Yeah.
I was actually reminded of my work starting a writing center in the law school. What's kind of cool about law students is, I mean, to get into law school, it's competitive. They'd all been really successful writers in their undergraduate careers. They'd come from history backgrounds or English backgrounds, and they'd gotten fantastic grades. When they came to law school, their first memo was so bloodied and marked up with red ink that they felt really defeated. I mean, this is something that happened again and again, and they come to the writing center, and it was really a matter of them sort of figuring out what exactly legal writing was and how it was different from the writing they'd done in the past. And it wasn't that they were bad writers, it was that they were new to this different genre of writing. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's where our rhetorical analysis assignments come in really handy. And Chad, you assign rhetorical analyses in your classes too. Yeah. The idea that the rhetorical analysis is a way of dissecting a type of writing, a genre of writing, and saying, okay, what kind of moves does this sort of writing make? And then you can turn around and say, okay, now how can I sort of map these moves onto my own writing so that I can internalize those conventions?
Yeah. One thing that you were saying too, Paula, so I don't want to interrupt your really great sort of like talking about this really important topic. It reminds me, I was going to pull it up too. Someone else had written a little bit about this distinction between being a bad writer or being told that they're a bad writer, viewing themselves always as a bad writer, as opposed to like a new writer or a developing writer. And I think that's such an important point to make too, because I feel like I had an experience as well. I wonder if we all have. I wonder if this is like a common theme where someone tells you that you're like not very good at something related to writing. Like I was a terrible speller. Like I could, excuse me, I could not spell at all. And I remember specifically in second grade being told that I wasn't going to be doing very well in class because I couldn't spell anything. And how funny, now it doesn't really matter if we know how to spell because we have so many tools and supports to be able to help us, like spell check and whatnot. But yeah, I think that that's such an important thing to reflect on too. Being able to separate this sense of being told through a red pen and all the markups that you might get on a piece of paper that the writing that you're going through, it's developing, it's trying to meet some certain type of goal that is very much situated in a context, and all of these different rhetorical analysis kind of concepts that we've been learning about. The writing happens within that context, and it can be really hard, I think, to separate that from your own self identity and persona as a writer. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I guess that kind of ties a little bit into one of the first things that we wanted to talk about for today, if that's okay. I'm not sure, did you have more you wanted to say?
No, go Chad, go.
I was thinking this might be a good transition into talking a little bit more too about these concepts. So this week sees 3 more discussion board forums and in-depth sort of instruction on this, what we've called Rhetoric 101 series. So this week, I think we're talking about, let's see, it's Kairos, I know, is the big one. And I think last week we did audience and logos, I believe. So this week we're also talking about
We've got Pathos, Logos, and Kairos are this week.
All right, awesome. So Pathos, Logos, and Kairos, thank you. On top of that as well, there's also this more sort of summative or cumulative discussion forum that kind of like builds upon the work that we've been doing for the past 2 weeks in these Rhetoric 101 forums. And I think it's important. We wanted to kind of stress that even though it might seem like as you're entering into this one, it's talking about the same sort of material. You're bringing together these rhetorical terms and thinking about them critically in the cause and the work that all the participants are working in. It's going to be a really important and hopefully really helpful discussion board to contribute to as well and to collaborate with each other on, because it's really thinking forward to future projects and modules that are coming up in the MOOC as well. One thing that's so awesome, I think, about this MOOC is that there's a real attention to public audiences, but also real audiences. So as participants are thinking about, I mean, just these really awesome interventions that they want to make in really timely conversations that are happening on even a global scale. I'm thinking of Tariq's post now, thinking about being located in the UK and all of the things that are happening in terms of political extremism as well in the US, and there too, all of these things that he's trying to make an intervention in. That discussion board post is going to be a real helpful tool in being able to start synthesizing these rhetorical terms into the action that the participants you all want to have, the intervention that you want to have in these conversations. So I think specifically the outline that Kay has given us for that discussion board post is to think about the kinds of things that you will do as you're making an intervention using these rhetorical concepts, or alternatively, the things that you wouldn't do and why. So a real low stakes sort of discussion board forum, but a really important one that I encourage everyone to take, obviously, some time to contribute to start thinking about how these concepts are going to influence the way that you're making that intervention into your cause. So wanted to point that out, I guess. Oh, and also adding on to that too, it's great as well because it's a discussion board forum to also be thinking about responding to each other too. So that's a really important thing as well. It's not just you speaking into a vacuum, but us as well as the other participants will have an opportunity to look at that and respond as well too.
Mm-hmm. Chad, we just got our first question on the Q&A. So I'm going to select it and hopefully it'll be displayed on the screen.
Great.
Let's see, it says selecting question, please wait. So the question is, it comes from Ben McCorkle, one of the instructors in this course. He says, hi, you two. How do you personally go about approaching the task of writing for a genre that you haven't written in before? Chad, do you want to jump on that, or do you want me to talk about sort of my process and approach first?
Yeah, well, I guess I only have the one experience, so if you would like to jump in, that would, yeah.
Yeah, well, I am a first-generation college student, and so a lot of my college career has been saying, okay, so what is this genre? What am I supposed to be doing? And how do I do it? And the first thing I generally do is I gather a lot of examples of successful writing. For example, when I was on the job market, I wasn't sure what a cover letter and a CV looked like for an academic position. So I gather a lot of CVs and cover letters from friends, both successful and unsuccessful. And then I looked for common themes in those cover letters. What sort of phrases were people using? What were people talking about more, and what were people not talking about so much? And then I sort of compiled a list of how people write these documents. And then I modeled my own document based on those themes. So I sort of created for myself an assignment prompt and then answered it. I think samples for me are extremely instructive, and like actually going about dissecting those samples in a really deliberate way can be hugely useful.
Yeah. I totally agree. One, I was also thinking of academic writing too. I mean, it seems so apropos for us because we're both PhD students and sort of like straddling this sort of like identity as expert, but also learning in the field at the same time too. And I think absolutely, like, I use examples too. And one thing that I think has been a struggle for me, but has ultimately been incredibly helpful, is trying very hard to not be so self-conscious about the writing that I'm producing. Because I think on top of examples, one thing that has been so instructive and helpful for me as I approach the task of writing in a genre that I'm not completely familiar with is really utilizing my human network. So building collaborations, advisor relationships with people that I trust to give me both honest and critical and generative feedback. I think that for me has been so helpful to have people that I trust who will respond to my writing in ways that I know won't, I guess, like necessarily tear me down, but who also kind of know that genre a little bit more and will be able to tell me in a forceful way sometimes, you know, that this needs to be changed or you need to go about thinking in an entirely different way. You were talking to about like materials that you put together for like job applications or like grad school applications. I'm just like amazed at how many revisions I went through for like my statement of purpose, and even just for like articles as you're writing them too to get published, all of the different revisions that you go through, it's amazing. Think how much time you spend writing that first draft compared to like all of the different revisions that you go through. It's really, yeah, it's a lot of revision, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you said something earlier that I think was really great and is also useful for me. Thinking of myself as a writer, not in terms of like being good at something or bad at something, but thinking of it in terms of being new at something, you know, and like gaining experience. This idea that learning how to write for a particular genre is not as much a matter of skill as it is practice and experience and strategy, and being really kind to myself as a new writer and saying, okay, so this first draft, it'll probably suck a little, but that's okay, because first drafts often suck a little. But it'll get better because I can change it, and like I can use my network and develop it, and you know, it'll get better, and that's okay.
I love that soundbite. I think that should go on our name tags, maybe a little bit. Like, first drafts can suck a bit. It's okay. You're allowed to suck a little bit for a while. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ben. That was a great question. It was fun to answer that one.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. Should we turn to another one of our questions that we have here? So I think maybe we've addressed a little bit the second question that's on our list here, talking a little bit about some confusion in the Rhetoric 101 discussion forums. Have we brought that up, do you think, a little bit? Or
I don't know that we've talked about that a whole lot yet.
Okay.
Let me see. What were the points of confusion in the Rhetoric 101 discussion forums? Let me click through and pull that up.
Yeah, so I'm thinking as you're doing that, as I've been going through and reading them, I mean, it might possibly be just in relation to how these concepts and the work that's being done in the discussion board forums relates to the assignments and other conversations that are happening in the MOOC and will be happening in the MOOC. I guess I can speak a little bit. Other participants in the past too have found it really helpful to be able to sort of have, even if you're a little bit, I know we have some participants this year who might be a little bit more familiar and even teach writing themselves a little bit. It's also helpful, I think, to be able to review these concepts and have some experience going through and looking at them as they occur in public writing for public audiences, as you then are going to be making an intervention in a cause that's important to you. So I think these Rhetoric 101 lectures and also discussion board posts are really cool ways to engage with that, to review these concepts and engage with them in a public way. And then also, I mean, I think they also serve the purpose of really generating some community as well. I know there have been some really great interactions. I think people are doing really well and getting to know each other through these forums. So I think that's been a real plus of these as well.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem to be kind of what you're seeing, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we were talking about addressing the themes of confusion in the Rhetoric 101 discussion forum, I'm trying to think back to the conversation we had on Monday about what we'd noticed going on in the course. And I think perhaps we were talking about like how we sort of define ethos, pathos, logos, audience, and kairos, but also how we think ethically and productively about appealing to emotion. I think that was one of the big conversations we had, and that sort of goes back to something, I think it was David Alexander who mentioned in one of his posts that he strives to write persuasively but not manipulatively. And you know, and this sort of like this line between persuasion and manipulation, and you know, how we differentiate and sort of the muddiness between the two. I mean, how do you think about that, or talk to your students about that, Chad, the difference between manipulation and persuasion when we're talking about especially using pathos, using emotion to persuade?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of a story that where I was before I came to Ohio is I was in Oregon at Oregon State University. And I remember one of my professors there had told a story about a time when she was teaching a composition course and was teaching about rhetoric and the power of rhetoric and persuasion. And someone in the class had essentially come up to her afterward and said, like, are you sure you should be teaching us about this? Like, it just seems like if you can do anything with language, that's really dangerous to just be teaching people about this. So I think that's, it kind of reminds me of this question a little bit, like, where is the ethical line in using the tools that you develop as a writer in persuasion, and especially in public audiences, shifting. I mean, we're kind of seeing this right now as well in the US, specifically as we're coming up to an election and the kinds of conversations that people are having in terms of topics that are important to our culture, and those politicians who are seeking, to be the next president. So, yeah, I think this is a huge question. And I mean, I personally don't think that there's an easy answer to it. I think it's a very complicated answer. But I mean, and it's a question it's been around, I really feel, for as long as we know of rhetoric being around. I mean, I'm thinking of like the early great Greek and Roman sort of writers. I mean, quintillion's big thing, right? I'm going to sound like such a geek now for bringing up quintillion, but I think like that's quintillion's big thing, right? Like a good man writing well, that is rhetoric. So, yeah, and I particularly think we're at a time now where how are we going to expand what we feel is good? So yeah, I think that's complicated. How do you answer that question, Paula?
Oh, well, yes. As I was saying, like the distinction between persuasion and manipulation, it's so muddy, Like there's that big in-between space. And yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer. It kind of reminds me of a book I read a while ago. When was this published? It's by Jay Heinrichs. It's kind of a popular piece of writing about rhetoric. It's called Thank You for Arguing. Chad, are you familiar with this book?
A little bit, yeah.
The subtitle is What Aristotle, Lincoln, and Homer Simpson Can Teach Us About the Art of Persuasion. And Heinrichs talks a lot about how he uses rhetorical techniques in his daily life, like interactions with his wife and his children and his coworkers, how he sort of uses these rhetorical techniques to persuade them to do what he wants them to do. But it's also manipulation. I mean, because you are trying to push people in the direction that you want them to go. And he explores the sort of murkiness of that. And his big argument is it's inescapable. We are going to be persuading people, and sometimes it's going to feel, a little manipulative. But that's rhetoric, and that's what happens when we have language. I mean, that's just sort of like embedded in our social structures. And I think what's really important is that we continue to think about how we're using rhetoric, what our goals are, what our causes are, and how we're thinking about our audiences and being sure that we're respecting our audience and trying to be faithful to the research, to the context. Like I think just having these conversations really helps us stay honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder, like a sense of. I'm trying to think of the specific word. It's kind of escaping me right now, but the impetus behind wanting to go about doing the persuasion, or I mean, manipulation, the way that you talk about it, and Heinrichs, it sounds like, talks about this concept as well. Like, yeah, I'm totally on board now. I'm like, yeah, I guess like we do manipulate each other all the time. But yeah, that does make me think about like, what are you trying to do through the act of writing? And is that really like serving a beneficial cause, or is it serving yourself? Is it, I think that all is really important. And again, I mean, I'm thinking about this in a very sort of like closed loop kind of sense. Like this gets back to like studying rhetorical concepts and how we've been looking at Rhetoric 101 in that lecture series. Like that's a way of being able to interrogate that impetus for wanting to go about writing and how it's doing that and how that persuasion is taking place in public. Yeah, it seems just that's so important to be able to not only do that sort of like sense of manipulation, but understand why it's happening and how it's happening as well. Because I think that can help get us a little bit closer to this sense of like, is it ethical? Maybe answering that question a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like we have one viewer right now. No, we've got two viewers. So I encourage all of you who are watching again, and those of you who are watching the recording after it's finished, because the YouTube link, it'll be accessible for as long as YouTube exists after this broadcast ends. I encourage you to send questions using the Q&A, or of course, you can send a question to our email address, which is composingmooc@gmail.com. It's composingmooc@gmail.com. You send a question in, we're looking at the email box right now, so we'll be on top of responding to it.
Yes.
Well, Chad, it looks like one of the points we wanted to hit on, I'm not sure if we've talked about it much yet, the use of images. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So maybe a little context for this too, what had me add it to our list. So Jackie brought up in, I believe it's the Module 2 assignment, the question about, is it acceptable essentially to use images in the writing that she's composing for the rhetorical analysis for Module 2? And so I think that this question is excellent, and it's an excellent time to bring up sort of like this element of multimodal composition and what not only I think do we kind of feel about multimodal composition, we can talk about that, but also what place does it have in this MOOC? And I think maybe I'll answer that second kind of question first, while also answering Jackie's question too. So I mean, absolutely, yes, please incorporate images into this assignment. But to give you a little preview of what's to come, Module 3 is all about multimodal composition and using sound and video and images to compose. So we're really going to actually, Ben McCorkle and Susan Delagrange have a lot of resources for us in Module 3 about how to use multimodal composition to be analyzing and contributing to change within the causes that we care about. So the real, I think, sort of meat, or the real bulk rather, of multimodal composition is going to be coming in Module 3. So I would say for Module 2, still focus primarily on alphabetic text as you're composing that rhetorical analysis. But if images are going to help you convey something, or be a real good sort of like support to a visual aid to what is being said or what you're referring to in your visual, or I'm sorry, in your rhetorical analysis, absolutely incorporate those elements too. And Canvas, the dialog box as you're posting it, has some tools there for attaching images that I think are pretty excellent. And if anyone has questions about that, please reach out to us too. We can, I don't think we created any supporting materials for that, but we would be happy to help with anything like that too. Okay, so that's kind of the second part of that question. Did you want to respond a little bit, Paula, you think, to multimodal composition?
That was actually a really thorough response, Chad. Okay. I think we can save a little bit of that multimodal conversation for office hours in the future when we're really digging in to that multimodal composition stuff in the modules. Yeah.
Okay. I like that. Yeah. It's important. We'll say that for now. Yeah.
Oh, we got a comment, but it's not a question, so.
Okay. All right, let's see. I think another point that we have up here, let's see, have we talked much? Do you want to respond to the sense of academic writing and if there's an art to it?
That's so muddy. Chad, I think you and I have had conversations about this. I mean, I think like as a graduate cohort, we have conversations about reading and writing in an academic context. I mean, I can start with a story maybe. Oops. There's a cat in the room. I'm so sorry.
The MOOC mascot.
So when I first started engaging with like more theoretical academic texts, I found myself a bit angry with the authors. I mean, at first I thought I was, you know, a little bit stupid because they're really dense and complex, especially some of the older academic writing, right? Like things from like the 50s or even earlier. But like I found myself really frustrated with the author because I felt like the author was trying to sort of keep me out, to obscure meaning, right? And I think a lot of people experience a similar frustration with academic writing because it's written for a very narrow audience. And when you're first engaging with academic writing in a particular genre, there's that word genre again, it can be difficult to sort of parse meaning because academic writing in biology is going to look a lot different from academic writing in composition and rhetoric, which is our field. And that looks different from academic writing in sociology or geology. I mean, and of course, legal writing looks different too. So I think the challenge with academic writing is, like I said, it's written for a really narrow audience. It's written to talk to other scholars who are studying the same kinds of stuff. And so it uses a lot of inside language. And I think maybe that's part of where a lot of people's and my frustration with academic writing comes. You know, you have to really read a lot of it to start to understand those conventions. But like this question of academic writing being artless or artful, I mean, I think it'd be really interesting to unpack what it means to write artfully. You know, like what we mean when we say that. I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Chad?
I mean, the first thing I thought about, I don't know if this is a good sort of connection to have quite so quickly, but when I think of art, I think of like artisan and sort of like a lot of sort of like, I don't want to say hipster because that's not like, I think that's almost the opposite, but sort of like this return that we're kind of like experiencing right now, this point in time where there's sort of like resistance to sort of like manufactured goods and a turn instead to like crafted, and I think that that's a key word, craft, but really like passionately made objects, I guess. I think there's a real focus on this and a real value in that. And I think of composition in a very similar way. And I think that academic writing could even fit into that, where there is, I mean, I'm not sure if art or if it's artful or artless is the way that I think about it, but I definitely do think about academic writing as being crafted. And I do think that there have been academic pieces. I mean, I'm biased because I'm a PhD student, so I love the field that I'm in and I love the work that I do. But I do feel like I have seen academic writing that I have thought, I want to be a writer like that because this is amazing. And this is, I would say, beautiful. Like there are certain articles that I think really have sort of that affective effect on me. Yeah, but it's an interesting question. That's a hard one too, in terms of like, is academic writing artful? I think I'm inclined to say yes, but just not, I don't know if it's like the same or if we look at academic writing the same as other forms of writing that we might consider art. I mean, this is also an interesting question, and I feel like it's getting back to this idea of genre or just cultural understanding of a certain type or set of writing, because I feel like for a very long time in our history, we would look at certain types of writing and say that these are literature and these are not literature. So I think that the boundary that we divide between these types of writing can be, like you said, very muddy and complicated, but sometimes also kind of problematic, I think, too. There you go. I get my grad student points for saying problematic. Yeah.
Well, it makes me think of about the rhetorical moves that we make when we write, because when we talk about academic writing, like I said, that's huge. There are lots of different types of academic writing, and even within our field, I think there are some writers who write in a more accessible way, and I mean, I find that artful when somebody can take a concept that's based in a lot of complex and rich research, and communicate it in a way that somebody who might be a little bit outside the field can understand, and that it has an impact on them. And people who kind of like jump that boundary between academic writing, go into popular writing, like Jay Heinrichs, also Mike Rose. Mike Rose is really great at sort of jumping that line between academic and popular writing. But I also think about like when academic writing is written in a way that seems to obfuscate meaning.
Yeah.
You wonder, like, is that an intentional rhetorical move in itself?
Yeah.
Because it's more difficult to respond to somebody's argument if it's hard to like really parse what their argument is, right? And so sometimes I wonder if it's intentional. Like that in and of itself is part of the rhetoric.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Trying to sound very complicated, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see. What else do we have on our list, Chad? Is there anything else that came in? Let's see if anything came in on the email. What do we got? No. What's on the list?
Yeah, I think our list is pretty well covered. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else that, oh, dear. All right, so it seems that the link to the YouTube version of our Hangout and the office hours announcement is broken. So we'll need to jump in and repair that. In fact, I can do that right after we finish up. Okay. Chad, do you think now is a good time to kind of wrap things up?
Yeah.
Do you want to like hang out for a few minutes and see if anybody pops by?
Yeah, we can do that. Absolutely. I mean, I guess in terms of wrap up, this week is sort of continuation of things that have gone on last week, and I've been noticing as well that a couple of people have been jumping on and introducing themselves in that general discussion forum. So we might have people who are kind of like catching up, have like just enrolled in the course and are catching up. So they might be coming to this a little bit later. But I think that if you are watching this, I think the one thing that's really important is coming up, I think it's in Module 3, right? We're going to start learning more about WEX, which is the Writers Exchange, which is sort of like our philosophy of going about doing peer review for this course. And that has some hard deadlines. So even though maybe if you're going back to like Module 1 and writing that assignment and posting it a little bit later, that should be fine. But when we get to like Module 3 and Module 4 too, those assignments have pretty hard deadlines because we're going to be doing peer review on them. So you'll just want to make sure that you do complete those by the deadline that's set. Otherwise, you can still submit them, but you won't be able to participate in peer review. So that's one thing maybe to highlight as we're going about.
Excellent. Thank you, Chad. That's actually a really great point to bring up. All right, so it's been a pleasure visiting with you and visiting virtually with all the students in the Composing for Public Audiences MOOC. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody next week.
Yeah, have a great week, everyone.
Take care.